52 hours. That was what stood between $3.4 billion in restricted American semiconductor technology and a cargo container on a tarmac pointed at a foreign weapons guidance supply chain. Not days, not weeks, hours. Inside a bonded warehouse in northern New Jersey, a steel container sat pre-manifested, pre-cleared, pre-approved. Every stamp was in order. Every form had been signed. The clearances had come through quickly and cleanly, granted without hesitation by a federal compliance reviewer who had been approving shipments like this one for the better part of 3 years. The reviewer's name does not matter. The title does. Senior Sanctions Screening Analyst. An OFAC-adjacent federal position. The kind of job most people have never heard of, in a unit whose entire purpose is to keep dual-use technology out of foreign adversaries' hands. The reviewer was not a spy in the traditional sense. No dead drops, no encrypted radio transmissions, no clandestine meetings in foreign capitals. The reviewer sat at a government-issued desk, logged into a federal system, and moved a cursor from one field to another. That was the operation. That was the betrayal. And it almost worked. What stopped it was not an algorithm, not an automated alert, not a classified intercept, not a tip from a foreign liaison. What stopped it was a junior analyst in a federal compliance unit, working a holiday shift because she had traded days with a colleague, who noticed that one reviewer had cleared 9 shipments overnight to 9 different importers at an average pace of 3 minutes and 51 seconds per file. She wrote a 3-line internal note. She flagged it to her supervisor. 11 months later, agents were at the door. This is the story of how they found him. It did not begin with a tip. It began with a timestamp, 2:41 a.m. on a federal holiday. The office was empty. The building's badge access system recorded one entry, a single card swipe, at the rear elevator bank of a federal contractor facility in Crystal City, Virginia. The reviewer had badged in alone, logged into the OFAC-adjacent screening terminal, and started processing files. Not unusual in isolation. Government compliance work does not observe holidays in any meaningful sense. Shipments clear every day. Containers move every day. But the pace was wrong. The federal screening system logs a timestamp for every action taken on a file. When it is opened, when each field is accessed, when a decision is entered. An experienced reviewer working efficiently clears a mid-complexity dual-use export file in 11 to 14 minutes. A fast reviewer on a simple file might do it in 7. The reviewer cleared 9 files that night in under 4 minutes each. 1 in 3 minutes and 22 seconds. 1 in 3 minutes and 48 seconds. 1 in 4 minutes and 9 seconds. The slowest of the night. A federal compliance file for a dual-use semiconductor shipment is not a short document. It includes technical specifications, end-user certificates, entity list cross-references, jurisdiction matrices, prior transaction histories, flagged alert queues, and supporting documentation that routinely runs to 40 or 60 pages. You cannot read 40 pages in 3 minutes and 51 seconds. You cannot even open 40 pages in 3 minutes and 51 seconds on a federal system with mandatory 2-factor authentication. The files were not being read. They were being approved. The junior analyst who noticed this, we will call her the analyst, did not immediately grasp the full weight of what she was looking at. She was not a counterintelligence officer. She was not trained in sanctions evasion typology. She was a mid-level compliance technician running a routine audit of overnight processing logs, a task assigned to whoever drew the holiday shift. But she knew what the timestamps meant, and she wrote it down. Her 3-line internal note read, in substance. 1 reviewer, 9 clearances, under 4 minutes each. Federal holiday, 2:41 to 4:17 a.m. Recommends supervisory review. She sent it up the chain. Then she went home. I went through the operational record of cases like this one, and one detail kept nagging at me. The analyst did not know she had started a federal investigation. She thought she had flagged a data entry anomaly. Those are very different things. The supervisor who received the note did not escalate it immediately. That is not a criticism. It is how federal compliance bureaucracies work. Anomalous processing speeds have benign explanations. A reviewer trained on a specific file type might legitimately clear faster. A simplified overnight batch might contain lighter documentation sets. The supervisor logged the note, pulled the 9 clearances manually, and checked the importers against the entity list. None of the 9 importers were on any watch list. That was the first obstacle. Clean paperwork is the best cover for dirty operations. The reviewer had not approved shipments to known bad actors. Known bad actors do not get approved. The reviewer had approved shipments to 9 newly registered shell importers, each incorporated within the previous 18 months, each with a clean compliance history because they had no compliance history at all. New entities. No flags. No priors. No matches. The supervisor brought in a senior analyst from the unit's internal audit division. The senior analyst did something simple. She pulled the full approval history for the reviewer. Not just the 9 overnight clearances, but every file the reviewer had touched in the previous 12 months. The number that came back was 287. 287 files that had entered the system flagged for secondary review, flagged by the automated alert system for one or more indicators of concern, and had been manually recoded by the reviewer as routine maintenance holds before a decision was entered. Not denied, not escalated, recoded, reclassified from a flag state to a neutral state, and then approved. 287 flags. Gone. Over 11 months of records the internal audit team could access directly. Before that, the system had been migrated, and older records required a formal request. The senior analyst called the Office of Inspector General. The OIG called the FBI. Operation QI et el Diger was opened in the second week of March, the prior year. The task force that assembled around Quite et el Diger was joint from the first day. FBI Counterintelligence Division provided case agents and technical resources. Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. FinCEN provided transaction analysis capability. OFAC's enforcement arm provided regulatory access and institutional knowledge of the screening system. The National Security Division of the Department of Justice provided legal oversight and prepared the Title III wiretap application. A Title III federal wiretap is not a simple instrument. The application requires a detailed showing of probable cause, a specific list of facilities to be intercepted, a minimization procedure, and judicial authorization. It is not granted quickly. The first QIELEDIR wiretap application took 6 weeks to prepare and was authorized on a Thursday afternoon in late April. By that point, the task force had already built a preliminary picture of what they were looking at. The 41 shell importers, the full count, not just the 9 from the holiday shift, had been cross-referenced against incorporation records, registered agent databases, financial institution reports, and international shipping manifests. 41 companies, 41 sets of paperwork. 41 sets of principals. 13 of the 41 shared a registered agent. 8 shared a principal address, a mail forwarding service in Delaware. 6 had opened accounts at the same regional bank within a 60-day window, 18 months prior, using wire transfers from a single Hong Kong correspondent account. That correspondent account was the thread. FinCEN analysts pulled the full transaction history on the Hong Kong account, a process that required mutual legal assistance treaty requests and took 3 weeks longer than the task force had hoped. When the records came back, the account resolved to a procurement intermediary incorporated in a British overseas territory, which traced through 2 additional layers to a technology acquisition entity with documented ties to a PLA-affiliated research institute. MSS-linked, Ministry of State Security Procurement Infrastructure. Not a rogue actor, not a criminal enterprise in the conventional sense. A structured state-sponsored supply chain penetration operation run through commercial fronts using American compliance infrastructure against itself. The restricted semiconductors were not going to consumers. They were going into a foreign weapons guidance supply chain. Put yourself in the task force's position for a moment. You are looking at 41 shell companies, a state-sponsored procurement network, and a federal employee with access to the screening system at the center of all of it. You know what is happening. You cannot move yet. Because the moment you move, the handler, whoever is running the reviewer, goes dark, the shells dissolve, and the procurement network reroutes through a different mechanism. You need the financial connections, the communication channels, the broker intermediaries, and the physical evidence. You need all of it before you touch a single door. That is what 11 months of QET LE looked like. The wiretap went live in late April. What it captured in the first 30 days was less than the task force expected. The reviewer was careful on voice and text, using a secondary device for communications that did not match any registered number. The first month of intercepts produced fragments, coded references to shipment numbers, brief confirmations, one conversation in which the reviewer used the phrase maintenance coding in a context that was unmistakably not about maintenance. That was the second obstacle. The reviewer was communications disciplined, not trained at the level of a foreign intelligence officer, but careful. Careful enough that the wiretap alone was not going to build the case. The task force adapted. FinCEN analysts built a financial thread in parallel, following the payment side rather than the communication side. The reviewer's personal finances were subpoenaed under federal court order. What came back was methodical concealment, but not perfect concealment. $214,000. Deposited across 3 years in increments that individually fell below standard reporting thresholds, a pattern called structuring, which is itself a federal offense under 31 U.S.C. 5324. The deposits moved through a sequence of accounts. A personal checking account, a small LLC opened in the reviewer's spouse's name, a cryptocurrency exchange, and finally into a conventional investment account. The total, reconstructed across the full 3-year period, $214,000. $214,000. What the reviewer handed through in exchange: 287 cleared alerts, 41 shell importers, an estimated $3.4 billion in restricted dual-use semiconductor technology routed into a foreign weapons guidance supply chain. $214,000. $3.4 billion. That ratio, that arithmetic, is the document. The whole case in 2 numbers. What's most surprising about this case is not the scale of the betrayal. It's the price. $3.4 billion in technology transferred to a foreign adversary's weapons program, and the total cost to that adversary was $214,000, less than the annual salary of the federal position the reviewer held, less than the cost of a single clearance-level background investigation. The reviewers checking the counters were not checked. Here's the take that will probably get pushback. The compliance system that allowed 287 alerts to be manually recoded by a single reviewer, without a second-level human review, without an automated anomaly flag, without any supervisory checkpoint. That system did not fail. It was designed the way it was designed. The vulnerability was not accidental. It was structural. And the question of who approved that structure, and when, and why, is a question the indictment does not answer. By the 6th month of QETLE Deger, the task force had 3 parallel threads running: the wiretap on the reviewer's secondary device, the financial reconstruction through FinCEN, and a physical surveillance operation covering the reviewer's residence, the Crystal City facility, and 2 locations in Northern Virginia tied to the broker intermediaries. The broker intermediaries were 2 individuals operating as independent trade compliance consultants. On paper, legitimate, licensed, registered. Both had held security clearances in previous government positions. Clearances that had lapsed, but whose existence meant both had been vetted, had passed background investigations, had held positions of federal trust. One of the intermediaries had been the reviewer's supervisor, 8 years earlier. That connection, former supervisor, now private consultant, now apparent broker in a state-sponsored technology transfer operation, was what the task force had been looking for. It answered the question of how the reviewer had been recruited. Not through a foreign intelligence approach, not through a honey trap or a coercive leverage operation. Through a professional relationship. An old colleague who had moved into the private sector found a lucrative side business and knew exactly where the gaps in the screening system were because he had helped build part of it. The wiretap captured one conversation between the reviewer and the first intermediary in month 7 that the task force later described as the clearest single piece of evidence in the case. The reviewer asked, in substance, whether the process was going to change, whether additional review layers would be added to the system. The intermediary said, in substance, that they had time. That the last shipment was almost ready. That after the last shipment, they would go quiet for at least 6 months. The last shipment. The task force identified it within 72 hours of that intercept. A container pre-manifested at a bonded warehouse in northern New Jersey. Semiconductor components. Dual use, restricted. Packaged as industrial control equipment for what the manifest described as a food processing machinery manufacturer in Southeast Asia. The container was scheduled for pickup in 52 hours. The task force had a decision to make, and they had to make it fast. Move now on the container and the reviewer and both intermediaries simultaneously. Take the evidence that existed and build the prosecution from what was already on the wire, in the financial records, in the surveillance logs. Or wait, let the container move, try to build more. The option of waiting was closed immediately. The container could not move. Whatever was in it could not reach its destination. The task force was not going to let $3.4 billion in restricted technology become $3.4 billion and whatever the shipment added. The QETLE arrest plan was finalized in 36 hours. There is a line in the operational planning documentation, reconstructed from cases of this type, that reads almost like fiction. Simultaneous execution across 4 primary locations, with secondary assets staged at all identified egress points, coordination window not to exceed 11 minutes from first dynamic entry to last subject in custody. 11 minutes, 4 locations. 3 subjects, 6 encrypted drives, 1 warehouse container, and the question of whether the intermediary who had been the reviewer's former supervisor had already been tipped off by a source the task force had not identified. That was the third obstacle. The possibility of a leak. The task force compartmented the arrest plan at the highest level available. Access restricted to the operational core, case agents, and the supervising AWESA. No broader distribution. No advanced coordination with the facility's building management, which would have required notifying security personnel who were not cleared for the operation. The agents went in with building schematics pulled from public permit records and a secondary entry plan in case the primary access point was blocked. The container was handled separately. A team from Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, was pre-positioned at the bonded warehouse beginning at 3 a.m. the morning of the operation, dressed as facility workers, with the cooperation of the warehouse operator who had been brought in under a federal grand jury seal 24 hours prior. The warehouse operator knew agents would be there. The warehouse operator did not know why. The container was not going to move regardless. The morning of the operation, 5:14 a.m. Eastern Time, Crystal City, Virginia. The reviewer's badge access log showed entry to the Crystal City facility at 5:09 a.m., an early start. Not unusual for the reviewer. FBI surveillance units had been on the building since 3:30 a.m., 2 agents in the parking structure, 2 agents at the building's rear entrance. The arrest team, 6 agents, 2 supervisors, 1 evidence technician, staged in 2 vehicles on the street level. The command was given at 5:22 a.m., 5:22 a.m. Both entry teams moved simultaneously. Front entrance and rear elevator bank. The reviewer was at a workstation on the 4th floor, logged into the federal screening system, when agents entered the office suite. There was no resistance. The reviewer looked at the agents, looked at the credentials presented, and said nothing. Hands up. Turned. Cuffed. One of the agents later noted, in a written report consistent with cases of this type, that the subject's first question was not about a lawyer or about the charges. The subject asked whether the system had been locked, whether the workstation had been secured, whether anyone else would be affected. It was not altruism. It was intelligence. The reviewer trying to understand, in real time, how much the task force knew and whether the intermediaries had been taken simultaneously. They had. 5:23 a.m. The first intermediary. The former supervisor was taken at his residence in McLean, Virginia. He was in the kitchen when the door came in. Dynamic entry, front and rear simultaneously. No resistance. He was in handcuffs within 45 seconds of the first knock, 5:24 a.m. The second intermediary was taken at a short-term rental unit in Arlington, Virginia, where surveillance had tracked him for the previous 9 days. He had not gone home in 9 days. He had paid cash for the rental. He had purchased a prepaid phone 48 hours before the arrest. He knew something was coming. He did not know it had already arrived. 5:29 a.m. HSI agents at the bonded warehouse in New Jersey formally seized the container. It was moved off the tarmac staging area and into a federal evidence bay. The manifest was pulled. The seals were broken under federal warrant. Inside, semiconductor components consistent with the restricted export categories identified in the QHET-E Deer investigation, packaged in industrial casing labeled as food processing control units. 5:33 a.m. The command center confirmed all 3 subjects were in custody. All 6 encrypted drives, 4 from the reviewer's workstation, 1 from the intermediary's home office, 1 from the Arlington rental, were in evidence bags. No subjects had been able to transmit anything. The secondary device the reviewer had used for handler communications was recovered from a desk drawer at the Crystal City facility. It was already logged off. The network was in custody. The container was on the ground. 52 hours had become 11 minutes. The charges came down in a federal grand jury indictment filed in the weeks following the arrest. The reviewer faced counts under 18 U.S.C. 794, gathering or delivering defense information to aid a foreign government, carrying a potential sentence of life imprisonment. Additional counts under 18 U.S.C. 1956 for money laundering and 31 U.S.C. 5324 for structuring. The government's sentencing memorandum would later describe the reviewer's conduct as among the most consequential sanctions evasion acts prosecuted in the current decade. The first intermediary, the former supervisor, faced counts under 18 U.S.C. 951, acting as an unregistered agent of a foreign principal, and 18 U.S.C. 371, conspiracy to defraud the United States. The government alleged he had served as the primary broker between the reviewer and the MSS-linked procurement network, negotiating the payment structure and telling the reviewer how to recode the alerts in a way that would survive a routine audit. The second intermediary faced conspiracy charges and a count of attempted export of controlled technology in violation of the Export Administration Regulations and the Arms Export Control Act. The 6 encrypted drives were processed by the FBI's forensic laboratory. What was recovered, across all 6 drives, was a comprehensive record of the operation. Shipment manifests, approval codes, payment confirmation records, and what agents described as a full accounting ledger maintained by the reviewer tracking every transaction, every clearance, every recoded alert. 41 shell importers, 41 lines in the ledger. Dates, amounts, confirmation codes. The reviewer had kept receipts. Here's what this case actually tells us. The most sophisticated sanctions evasion operation uncovered in this review period was not technically sophisticated at all. It did not require hacking. It did not require physical exfiltration. It did not require any technical penetration of a federal system. It required one person with legitimate access to a federal workstation and the ability to move a cursor from one field to another. The sophistication was structural. It exploited the gap between what the automated system flagged and what a human reviewer could do with that flag. That gap was the operation. The handler. The MSS-linked contact who had managed the payment channel and directed which shipments to prioritize was never in the United States. The task force had a name, a general profile, and a location consistent with an intelligence services structure operating out of a foreign country with no extradition treaty. The handler went dark within 12 hours of the arrests. The cryptocurrency wallets used to move the reviewer's payments were drained within 4 hours. Whoever had been running this operation from the other side knew within hours that QI et al. Ledger had closed. They are not in custody. They are not likely to be. Going through years of sanctions evasion prosecution records to understand how cases like this one get detected, the pattern is consistent enough to be almost a formula. The automated systems catch some things, flag others, and miss the edge cases where a human operator has decided to recode the flag rather than act on it. The edge cases are the cases. The edge cases are always the cases. Would you have noticed the 4-minute clearance time? Comment yes or no, because the analyst who flagged it was not looking for espionage. She was running a routine audit on a federal holiday because she had traded shifts with a colleague. If she had not traded that shift, the container would have been in the air in 52 hours. One shift, one analyst, one note. If you follow cases like this, the sanctions enforcement cases, the insider threat prosecutions, the federal compliance failures that turn out to be something else entirely. Subscribe to Federal Casebook and tell us in the comments which thread you would have pulled first, the processing speed anomaly, the shell company registrations, or the financial structuring. The task force ran all three in parallel. Each one alone might not have been enough. $3.4 billion in restricted semiconductor technology, $214,000 paid to the reviewer who cleared it, 287 red flag alerts manually recoded as routine maintenance holds. 41 shell importers registered over 18 months and cleared in a single year. 9 clearances on a single overnight shift on a federal holiday between 2:41 and 4:17 in the morning. 4 minutes, the average time per file. 11 months of investigation. 11 minutes of simultaneous arrests. 3 subjects in custody. 1 handler, unreachable. 0 algorithms that caught the 4-minute clearances. 0 automated anomaly detections for 287 recoded alerts. 1 analyst. 1 shift she had traded with a colleague. 1 3-line internal note. The network is dismantled. The container is in a federal evidence bay. The technology did not reach its destination. But the compliance system that made this possible is still running. The recoding mechanism still exists. The gap between what an alert flags and what a reviewer can do with that flag is still there. In this unit, in others, in frameworks built before anyone imagined that the reviewer behind the screen might have already decided what the answer was going to be before the file opened. How many alerts are being recoded as routine right now, and who is counting the counters? 1.